Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. Indigenous Services Canada says it is planning a forensic audit of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in Saskatchewan. The department says in a statement to APTN News they are following up on allegations against the FSIN. FSIN represents 73 First Nations in Saskatchewan. Its head office is in Saskatoon. The audit will look into all money the FSIN has received from the department going back to 2019 to the present, according to a letter addressed to FSIN Chief and AFN Regional Chief Bobby Cameron that was dated March 15th. The letter says the period of review could change based on the findings. In its statement to APTN News, ISC says the department takes allegations and complaints regarding the misuse of public funds very seriously. The FSIN has not responded to a request for comment. At a press conference earlier this week, an FSIN representative would not answer questions about the audit. The Auditor General released two reports this week, one on First Nations housing and one on policing. And to no one's surprise, Karen Hogan gave the federal government failing grades on both. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Bonjour. Good afternoon.
Auditor General Karen Hogan says nothing has changed in the past 20 years when it comes to the poor quality housing First Nations communities have become used to.
After 4 audit reports, I can honestly say that I am completely discouraged that so little has changed and that so many First Nations individuals and families continue to live in substandard homes.
The auditor's latest report finds Ottawa has only completed 20% of its commitment to close the First Nations housing gap by 2030. First Nations people are 4 times higher to live in overcrowded housing and 6 times higher to live in homes needing major repairs than the non-Indigenous population, according to the 2021 census. And mold continues to be a problem in many First Nations homes. Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu acknowledges there are problems, but says the government remains committed to closing the First Nations housing gap by 2030.
That's why that goal is in place, so that it focuses the mind of all departments of the Government of Canada that we need to work faster and that we need to be making ambitious investments like the ones we've already made, but I would argue more, and that we need to be working with partners to make sure that we have the creative solutions to closing that gap.
When it comes to First Nations policing services, Hogan says the government didn't do well in this area either. All too often, her report finds, money targeted for these services isn't getting to where it is supposed to.
We also found that because of staffing shortages over the past 5 years, the RCMP has been unable to fully staff the positions for which it receives funding under the program's agreements. This leaves First Nations and Inuit communities without the level of proactive and community-focused policing services that they should receive.
The auditor's report finds $13 million targeted for First Nations policing services in the 2022-2023 fiscal year went unspent, and 62 RCMP positions funded under the Community Tripartite Agreement went unhired. Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc says staffing shortages have been a problem, but believes new RCMP Commissioner Mike Duhaime is making headway.
It's not a secret. Commissioner Duhaime has talked about some of the challenges around recruitment in the RCMP and filling some of the vacant positions that exist. I think he's got an effective plan that will and has already started to deal with this challenge, but that's one of the realities that the RCMP is facing.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Still in Ottawa, NDP MP Leah Gazan pushed forward the idea of red dress alerts on Parliament Hill. The alerts would be a Canada-wide system to help find missing Indigenous women and girls. A year ago, the red dress motion received unanimous support in the House of Commons. Now, the Standing Committee on the Status of Women has began their study on the topic. Annette Francis has details.
NDP MP Leah Gazan has been at the helm for the calls to action. Last May, she gathered in the foyer of West Block with families of missing or murdered.
I am standing alongside my sisters today to support them in their calls to on the government to fully support a Canada-wide emergency, immediately support the development of a national redress alert system without delay.
A Canada-wide system would alert the public through cell phones and other media when an Indigenous woman, girl, or two-spirit person goes missing. On Tuesday, before the Committee on the Status of Women began its first study on redress alerts, Gazan addressed the media.
We know from the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, calls for justice 9.1 to 9.11, that current systems that are there to protect us aren't. This is a critical initiative. This is an initiative that will save lives, and I'm urging the Liberal government to get this through with proper consultations by the Indigenous community.
Later, the committee welcomed its first witnesses. One of them was Kurt Eby, a director at Palmerex, the company that operates the weather alert system. He said a red dress alert would take no time to put in place.
Everyone's familiar with the Amber Alert. We recently added silver alerts to the system, which is if someone with Alzheimer's or dementia or cognitive disabilities goes missing, you issue what's called Silver Alert. That's being piloted in Quebec. There has been some Silver Alerts issued. It's really no different than that. It's another vulnerable person use case, and you would add that to the system and issue the alerts the same way. And I think this is a well-known issue. I think Canadians generally, if they saw a red dress alert, they would understand what it was talking about.
Jennifer Justy created her own system, the Unama'ki Emergency Alert. It serves 5 Mi'kmaq First Nations. Once subscribed to it, one can choose to receive an alert through text message, email, or landline. Justy developed it in response to the Nova Scotia mass shooting in April 2020. She said, however, there have been challenges because law enforcement has not requested the use of her alert system.
So we did have an Indigenous woman go missing, reported by an off-community or off-reserve organization. She didn't show up for curfew. They immediately phoned the police to say, this was at 10 o'clock at night, to say, hey, she didn't show up for curfew. The police chose not to request an alert to be sent out by me, and she was found dead the next morning. Would my alert have saved her life? Maybe, maybe not. But you didn't even give me a chance.
According to Gazan, there are 4 more committee meetings scheduled for the study. The consultation process will continue, but there is no deadline to have the system in place yet. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
In November, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down the province of Quebec's jurisdictional challenge to Bill C-92. The Act recognizes Indigenous peoples have jurisdiction over child and family services. It also outlines national minimum standards of care. On Monday, the bill was a topic for the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Here again is Annette Francis with more.
Witnesses from the Department of Indigenous Services and the Department of Justice began with an overview of the legislation. Then came the Q&A from members of Parliament. There were a few questions about how the implementation process is going to date. But it didn't take long before Conservative MPs Martin Shields and Jamie Schmel hijacked the discussion by introducing a motion to axe the carbon tax.
We'll go to the speaking list. So Mr. Schmel, you're first.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to my colleague Martin Shields for raising that very important motion. As he pointed out, 133 chiefs of Ontario have come out against the carbon tax. We've had multiple premiers, territorial leaders, all speaking about how the carbon tax has increased the cost of living for the people they represent. And I think
after about 5 minutes, Liberal MP Hyman Batiste was able to end the debate on the carbon tax. But when it was NDP MP Leah Gazan's turn, she scolded the Conservatives for their motion.
The biggest issue in our community is child welfare and the fact that our kids are dying in the system, and the fact that the Conservatives in this committee today are talking about life and death and how hard it is for families. I'd like them to come to Manitoba, where 90% of the kids currently in care are First Nations, who are dying in the system, going murdered and missing as Indigenous women, and then we'll talk about urgency. I find it disgusting.
I'm going to stop there. That's not a point of order, but we've just
so that the public knows what games are being played on the backs of the lives of our kids in this committee.
Katrina Peddle is the Director General of the Department of Indigenous Services. She testified that there are now 7 Indigenous governing bodies now asserting jurisdiction over child welfare in Canada. She was asked how long it would take for over 200 more to take control.
You know, that's a very good question. It does depend upon the pace at which communities wish to proceed, so that is in their hands.
Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Still in Ottawa, witnesses testified at the Fisheries and Oceans Parliamentary Committee on Tuesday. The topic was how to prevent violence during the 2024 Elver fishing season. But the tone of discussions were about the mismanagement of the industry by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. DFO closed the Elver fishery season earlier this month. Elvers, or baby eels, can fetch up to $5,000 a kilogram. Stanley King is the spokesperson for the Canadian Committee for a Sustainable Fishery. He says the Elver stock is not at risk, and the closure cost 1,100 jobs. Meanwhile, 26 people have been arrested for unauthorized harvesting of Elvers in Nova Scotia. King testified DFO will not consult with industry experts and that he has met with First Nations to save the fishery.
So we have tried to circumvent DFO by contacting the Assembly of First Nation Chiefs ourselves. We've met with them. We've had really great discussions, but ultimately, we can't do anything without DFO's approval. Like, DFO is the governing body. So although we've tried, and the First Nations are willing to try, the license holders are willing to try, DFO is not willing to put us in a room together because, you know, it might just reveal too much of what they've been doing or what they haven't been doing.
The president of the Noon at Tuavut Community Council, or NCC, appeared in federal court in Ottawa to defend a memorandum of understanding signed with the federal government. NCC President Todd Russell held a press conference Thursday morning. The NCC represents about 6,000 people in southern Labrador who say they are Inuit. It signed a memorandum of understanding with the federal government in 2019 for the purpose of entering discussions regarding rights recognition and self-determination, and to support a land claim submission that overlaps Innu lands. On Tuesday, the Innu Nation and Indigenous leaders from Labrador and Quebec publicly declared that NCC members are not Indigenous and are asking the federal court to rule against the MOU. Russell says the allegations are false and an example of lateral violence.
It is particularly egregious when we hear such misinformation come from members of our own family, our relatives. Nunatuvet Inuit have occupied and had a special relationship with the land, the ice and waters of our territory long before the arrival of Europeans.
There's a new twist in the legal case over a proposed mine in the Yukon. Details on that and more after the break. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. Jeffrey Papati has been on a healing journey for the last 16 years. Recently, the day school survivor from Lac-Simon in Quebec was invited to speak at a Catholic gathering in Trois-Rivières. Our reporter Maricela Amador was on hand and spoke with Papati. And a warning, this report contains sensitive material on sexual assault.
Je vais avoir du courage pour m'amener ici. Parce que j'ai parcouru avec plein de haine.
Jeffrey Papati is talking about the abuse and pain he suffered at day school. He shared his story in front of an audience that included priests, bishops, and other members of the Catholic Church.
Parce que je sais, en sortant d'ici, je me sentis bien.
For many in attendance, it was their first time witnessing a story by a day school survivor.
C'est à partir de cet âge-là, de 13 ans, que j'ai vécu la honte toute ma vie.
Papaty has been sober for over 16 years and said that speaking his truth in the basement of a church was another step on his journey toward recovery and healing.
Dès l'âge de 13 ans, j'ai subi des choses que c'était pas correct par un faux prêtre.
He told the gathering that after he had been abused as a child by a priest, he lived his life in shame and fear.
C'est d'être ici pour encore plus me libérer des choses à l'intérieur avec moi, puis envers moi-même, que c'est des choses que j'ai gardées trop longtemps, depuis 38 ans, de silence. Ça fait 3 ans que j'ai réussi à en parler encore plus loin de mon enfance, depuis l'âge de 13 ans, tout ça. Fait que là, moi, j'ai pensé à moi-même de continuer à prendre soin de moi-même dans mon cheminement.
Papaty recounted spending decades working on himself, adding that in the beginning, it was incredibly hard to talk about his experience in day school.
C'est pas facile de demander pardon à quelqu'un ou quelqu'un qui vient te pardonner. Mais il y en a qui me l'ont fait avec moi, ceux que j'ai fait mal, ceux qui m'ont fait mal. J'ai demandé pardon à soi-même, surtout en premier.
Marilyn Roy, the coordinator at the Notre-Dame de Fatima Catholic Mission in Coujouac, said that Papaty's words touched her deeply.
C'est sûr que moi, c'est une question qui me travaille depuis longtemps, d'une manière particulière depuis 7 ans. Ça a été une question que j'ai portée au quotidien. Je dirais qu'en tant qu'allochtone, je trouve qu'il y a un chemin, en tout cas, favorable à cette réconciliation-là.
Roy added that it was necessary to listen to the stories of survivors and to resonate with them. At an event billed as one of reconciliation, Gilles Lemay, a bishop emeritus from Trois-Rivières, did not want to talk much about it.
La nécessité de la réconciliation, elle est réelle. Donc, je ne m'étendrai pas trop là-dessus.
For survivors who are still struggling from their trauma, Papaty had this to say.
Je le suggère juste d'avoir du courage à l'intérieur, de se libérer les choses qui ont mal.
The Hope for Wellness helpline provides immediate help. To reach the helpline, dial a toll-free number shown on the screen. Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Trois-Rivières, Quebec.
There's been a new development on a legal battle surrounding BMC Minerals' proposed Kikaya mine on Casca traditional territory in southeast Yukon. Here's Sarah Connors with the latest.
In January, Yukon Supreme Court ruled the territorial and federal governments mostly upheld their duty to consult with the Casca Nation when allowing BMC Minerals' proposed Kikaya mining project to proceed to the next stage in the approval process. But in February, the court ordered the governments to have a consultation meeting with the Casca and reissue a decision on whether or not the mine should proceed. That meeting has happened and the governments have released a revised decision. The new decision guarantees a water treatment plant and more input on managing an access road. It also proposes a project agreement between the governments and the Casca. The agreement would provide direction on how all parties could work together through the life of the project. But Chief Dylan Loblaw of the Ross River Dinna Council says no revisions or modifications in the decision document can change one simple fact.
The project is just simply in the wrong place, and we feel that a mine of that size and magnitude in a core caribou refuge shouldn't be designed and built at this time.
Back in February, the Casca Nation appealed the Territory Supreme Court's original decision that the Crown upheld its duty to consult with the Casca on the mine, among other things. Chief Loblaw says the Casca will continue with their appeal. The proposed mine's owners say they're confident they can meet all of the requirements of the revised decision document, and they'll continue to engage with the Casca. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
It's been long delayed and costly, but the federally owned Trans Mountain Pipeline has nearly been completed. According to the company, the pipeline's final cost will be about $34 billion. In 2018, the federal government bought the pipeline for $4.5 billion, expecting the final price to complete it to be around $7.4 billion. The expansion will nearly triple the amount of oil being sent from Alberta to the BC coast to be shipped in oil tankers for international markets. Final testing is ongoing with operations expected to begin by Canada Day. 890,000 barrels of oil a day will be transported by the completed pipeline. Sad news for hockey fans this week with the announcement of the death of NHL enforcer Chris Simon. That story and more still to come. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. Yukon government raised the Two-Spirit flag outside of the Legislative Building Tuesday in honor of Two-Spirit Day. Two-Spirit Day, or Two-Spirit and Indigenous LGBTQIA plus Awareness Day, falls on the spring equinox. The Yukon is one of the first jurisdictions in Canada to recognize the spring equinox as Two-Spirit Day. Government officials say proclaiming Two-Spirit Day on the spring equinox, when the day and night last almost the same amount of time, celebrates new beginnings and positive change. Jade Lacrosse, who is Anishinaabe and Tlingit, serves on the National Two-Spirited Guidance Committee for the Community-Based Research Centre.
I want to let everyone know that as Two-Spirit and Indigenous queer people, we have always been here. We are here today, and we will always be here.
And sad news to leave you with tonight, as condolences have been pouring in all week for former NHL enforcer Chris Simon, who passed away at the age of 52. A statement shared by the NHL Alumni Association said, quote, Chris was never afraid to stand up for his teammates and played a key role in the dressing room. He was a beloved friend, father, brother, and son. Simon was drafted 25th overall in the 1990 draft. During his lengthy NHL career, he played for 8 different teams and appeared in nearly 800 regular season games, scoring 305 points. Simon, who was Anishinaabe, became a Stanley Cup champion with the Colorado Avalanche in the 1995-96 season. Our condolences to his family, friends, and teammates. The family of Chris Simon says the former NHL player died by suicide and blames CTE, a fatal disease brought on by repeated head trauma, for his death. Well, that is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. You can find much more over on our website. That's aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.